This is by far the biggest lobster I've ever seen and caught. And it makes the 4 kilo crate behind me look like an absolute shrimp. But here are the top 10 lobsters I caught from the 2021-2022 lobster season. I hope you enjoy watching this as much as I enjoyed catching them all. Sheesh.
First up, number 10, we have the account opener. This was my first lobster I caught of the season, and in hindsight, I probably could have just grabbed this one with my hands as it was sitting quite far out. No doubt this was one of the easiest lobsters I'd ever caught, and it ended up going 3.1 kilos. Next up, number 9, lost and found. I'd spent over an hour trying to track down this lobster, but it just kept on moving around its cave like there was no tomorrow. After countless dives in it, we finally settled down at the very back, which allowed me to get right in there and get him out. It's honestly pretty normal though for me to spend up to a couple hours trying to get the bigger lobsters out, but I absolutely love the challenge and it's so rewarding when you finally get them out. And if it isn't obvious already, I'm obsessed with lobster diving and it is hands down my favourite species to catch.
Dennis!
Coming in at number 8, oh my gosh, I broke a nail. This lobster has literally scarred me both physically and mentally, and is now the main reason why I opt to use a snare on the bigger lobsters. I wonder if any of you guys can recognise this cave, as it's featured in a couple of my videos where I've pulled other big lobsters out of. So after a short game of operation with a lobster, I worked the snare to the base of its horns and pulled it tight. He went absolutely berserk, kicking up all the sand, which I don't blame, as if someone had put a snare around my ear or something, I probably would have done the same. I waited a bit for him to settle before slowly starting to pull him out, as I didn't want to break off his horn. But he really didn't want to budge. In the end, I decided to swim towards the lobster and grab onto it. The only thing was I couldn't see where I was grabbing, so I was feeling around for its horns when all of a sudden I felt its front claw cramp right down on my fingernail. I kid you not, this was one of the most painful things I've experienced out diving. Coming in at number 7, rest in peace Torch. This next lobster caused me so much grief. Not so much with catching, but finding the ledge after. Because as you can see, the entrance was covered by seaweed, and my drop weight that was marking the spot had somehow moved. I spent a good hour scanning over the area trying to find my torch, and while searching, I came across this lobster, which leads on to number 6. Looks can be deceiving. I thought this lobster was maybe 1 or 2 kilos, so I didn't care if I lost it, as I was still mad at the time about my missing torch. So I just went for it with my hands and managed to grab onto both its horns, and I knew straight away this lobster was a lot bigger than I thought it was. It ended up going just over 3 kilos and made for some delicious lobster noodles.
Yeah, I was gonna find my torch.
Coming in at number 5, CRAVID-19, as I actually had COVID-19 at the time, which I thought was just a cold, because I tested the day before this trip and my test had come back negative. This lobster was a bit of a mission to get out though, as it was sitting in a vertical ledge, which meant I didn't have anywhere to put my torch down on. This made it pretty tricky to see what I was doing, but in the end I had to try and hold the torch in position so I could see what I was doing while working the snare at the same time. If you're looking for a good cray snare though, I'd really recommend the Old Man Blue snares, as I know Bert over there has put a lot of thought into his design. Thankfully it all worked out in the end and I managed to snare the lobster, but this was no doubt the hardest dive trip I'd ever been on. So this next clip is a bit of a bonus one, the one that got away. This lobster will forever haunt me, as I really had to work for it, and to lose it this way was just heartbreaking. I'd spent a couple hours trying to get to it, and on this dive I finally committed to wedging myself in the crack in order to reach it with the snare. This lobster was massive though, and would have easily gone over 4 kilos, but sadly we'll never know its true weight. cray had unfortunately kicked open the snare and escaped and was long gone.
Oh, I had it fully on its tail.
Coming in at number 4, I call this one Shrek Swamp, as the visibility this day was absolutely filthy. Have a look at what it was like before I color graded it.
Disgusting!
In conditions like this, having a good torch really makes a world of a difference, because if you can't spot the cray, how are you supposed to catch it? I've gone through so many different dive torches, and the Night King by DivePro easily tops them all. It's got a narrow, powerful beam which makes it ideal for spotting crays, especially the bigger ones that sit at the back of caves. So many crays I've caught and spotted wouldn't have been possible without a torch like this.
I've actually reached out to DivePro to see if I can get a discount code for you guys, as I often get asked what torch I use.
However, right now, the torch is already on sale. But good news is, they've offered a further 10% off if you use the code EJC10. So it works out to be just over 200 bucks, which is bloody cheap for a torch of this standard. And I can guarantee you won't be disappointed. And I wouldn't recommend a product unless I believe in it, as it's honestly hands down the best all-round dive torch I've used. You're not going to find a better torch for a cheaper price.
DivePro always has a smaller torch, which I carry around as a spare, and is honestly just as good for spotting crays. The only real difference is battery life isn't as good, but it's less than half the price and still does the job.
Coming in at number 3, better safe than sorry. I've caught a couple big lobsters from this ledge, and it seems to be a hot spot for them. Anyway, I remember last season spending a couple hours on an identical lobster trying to get it out, as I made the mistake of thinking it was an easy grab, which wasn't exactly the case, as it wedged itself in, making it a nightmare to get out. And in the end, I ended up ripping off almost all of its legs and horns trying to get it out, which isn't ideal. And that's what I like about using this snare, as it minimises the damage done to the lobster. Coming in at number 2, never give up. I don't even know how long I spent trying to get this lobster out, but I can tell you it was a long time. It was in like a ledge which had another cave inside and was sitting at the very back, but I could see he had nowhere to go. I had Aurelia with me spotting me in this dive, which gave me the confidence to once again wedge myself in. There was no way I would have been able to use a tail snare in this guy, as I couldn't even see behind him. So right now I'm just trying to get the horn snare over its antenna. And for me, using the horn snare is normally a bit of a last resort, as it's a lot more risky and their horn can often snap off, but sometimes it's the only way you can reach them. Eventually, I managed to get the snare to the base of its horns and pull it tight, and of course it wasn't a fan of it. But I was holding my breath both literally and figuratively, as I was really worried that its horn was about to snap off. I can't even begin to tell you how many lobsters I've lost due to the horn breaking, so I was trying not to put too much pressure on it. Thankfully, everything worked out in the end and it came out in one piece.
Woo! Yeah, just launch it in.
And now, the lobster you've all been waiting for. The behemoth. This lobster was so deep in this cave, and I've color graded it so you guys watching can see what's happening, because it was pitch black in there and nowhere near this bright. The floor was absolutely covered in old abalone shells, which was a dead giveaway that there was something big lurking.
Up in there! Up in there! Woohoo! 4 kilo cray, I reckon, easy. Big boy, wow. That is fat.
4.5 kilo cray, new PB. Let's go.